All right, well, thank you all for joining us to sit down with editors of the Charleston Gazette-Mail, talking to Democratic candidates for the 2nd Congressional District. So the first thing we like to do is we like to introduce ourselves to you. So we'll go around the table, starting down on the end.
I'm Susan Shime, editor at Publisher Gazette-Mail.
I'm Brad McElhenney. I'm co-editor of the Gazette-Mail. One of my roles is working with the Daily Mail opinion page. I always like to say thank you for your time and thank you for being here to talk to us.
I'm Kelly Merritt, Daily Mail opinion page editor.
I'm Whitney Burdett. I'm an editorial writer for the Daily Mail opinion page.
Chris Dorst, photographer. I'm Greg Moore, I'm the city editor of the Gazette-Mail.
I'm Rob Byers, co-editor of the Gazette-Mail.
I'm Dawn Miller, I'm the Gazette opinion page editor.
David Gatman, I'm a reporter for the Gazette-Mail.
Okay, so and as you see, we are live streaming this and everything's on the record and it's not a debate, it's a discussion. And so the first thing we like to do is ask each of you to introduce yourselves and then tell us just for a minute why you're running. Keep it brief because then we'll do questions and discussion. Okay, so I'm just going to start on the end and we'll work our way down.
Yeah, my name is Robin Wilson. I live in Roane County. And my platform is basically 3 brief things. I think we need to renew our democracy, economy, and our climate. And I can get into more detail on that later. Thank you.
My name is Harvey Payton, and I'm from Putnam County. I'm a candidate for Congress for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think we've got good representation right now in this district, and I've lived here when we have had good representation. And second, for the first time in my lifetime, no member of the congressional delegation believes what I believe, which I think is the beliefs that I have in the Democrat Party are a foundation for growth and a better tomorrow for West Virginia. So I got in the race.
I'm Mark Hunt, and I'm a local lawyer here in Charleston. I've been married for 19 years. I have 2 children, and they're both in the school system here in Kanawha County. I'm running for Congress. This is not my first time here. I'm running because as a legislator for 14 years in the House of Delegates, I was able to be effective there. I had 21 bills passed as a freshman delegate, and I think I can take that same success to Washington. And I echo what Harvey just said. I don't think we have an effective congressman in Washington, and I think that I can go there, understand the issues of West Virginia, and get things done there as I got things done here.
I'm Cory Simpson, and I'm from here in Charleston. I grew up in South Charleston and went to WVU Law School. And when I was in law school, the attacks September 11th happened, and felt compelled to join the service and spent 12 years serving. About a year and a half of that in combat, and a good amount as a prosecutor, as the Army senior prosecutor in Europe. I met my wife while I was getting an international and military law degree in Charlottesville, Virginia. She's an active duty Army doctor and works out of Walter Reed. And I'm coming at this after 2 years at the Pentagon. Worked every day with the Hill, and my last year I was on a national commission for the future of the Army. I was the legal advisor for that, and my first 10 years of service, my assumption was that our elected leadership was working as hard as our military leadership to ensure our country was a success. 2 years in Washington, I no longer believe that. I concur with my colleagues here that I don't think we have an effective voice through Alex Mooney, and I am happy to come back and to be able to serve in a different capacity representing West Virginia's 2nd Congressional.
My name is Tom Payne, and I was born and raised in Kaiser, West Virginia, recognizing it used to be part of the 2nd District, but it's no longer. I am currently residing in Martinsburg. The reason I decided to run was Mr. Mooney is clearly what I call a carpetbagger, and I actually absolutely did not understand how he operates, how he could be elected in my home state. To give you an example, I was at an event in Upshur County just 3 days ago, a new business had come into West Virginia, and the representative of Senator Capito and Senator Manchin were there at the event, but there was not a representative of Congressman Mooney. So that further reinforced my belief that he was not a good congressman for West Virginia. And I have extensive experience in the military and in business. And I can help bring jobs to West Virginia, which is one of the main things, if not the main thing, that we need to have in this state. Thank you.
On Friday, the first day, the U.S. signed the Paris Climate Accord. Wondering if you agree with that signing, and where do we go from here in terms of battling climate change?
I just came from an Earth Day celebration out at West Virginia State that my wife organized, and it was exciting because there was lots of James Van Ostrom from the WVU Law School was there talking about the Clean Power Plan. So basically, I think the Paris Agreement was a tiny step forward. We need to do much more. Climate is one of the main issues that I feel strongly about, and I think the place we need to act strongest is policy. I think we need a fee and dividend that puts a tax on carbon, because unless you have a tax, it's not going to be an incentive for people to make the transition. And I also think we shouldn't leave the coal miners out to dry. I just finished a 3-day bicycle ride from Charleston to Buchanan, and I talked to the people who lost jobs in Clay County in coal mines, and it's tragic. We don't need to do that. So I think we can do both. We can prepare for a climate-safe future, and we can protect the coal miners.
All right, well, obviously, the fact that anthropogenic climate change is given. I mean, 97% of the scientific community is on board. And for those people who don't agree with that fact, it is a fact that 80% of the American people think that climate change is real. So perception is reality if reality is not. So we have to deal with that. I mean, we're going to deal with the issues of climate change. We need to move forward. I think the Paris Agreement was good. It's a good first step. We have to set an example. And the idea that people say, well, China's still going to burn coal and they're going to burn coal in India. Well, yes, but you've got to start somewhere. Two wrongs don't make a right. They just make a precedent for the third wrong. But my concern, of course, is about West Virginia. Where do we fit in this equation? We have to face reality. The country's going to move in a different direction. If Congress was disposed to amend the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, and have been for the last 15 years, they would have done it. They would have done it. They haven't been. The country is moving forward. Now, my thought about that is, here in West Virginia, we've been pretty well the source through thermal coal of cheap air conditioning and cheap power up and down the East Coast and then the Southeast for about 50 years, since the railroad market fell out from under coal and they went to electric power generation. And I just don't think it's fair that the country moves in a different direction and we're just the girl who's left at the dance because another pretty face comes along. There's a lot of money in the Clean Power Plan. If Congress would move forward with it, that would help this state. There was a lot of funding that in the HUD grants that the governor went out on the limb on in State of the State address. But our delegation, at least Congressman Mooney, didn't take any steps whatsoever to help secure that funding for the state. It's almost, to my mind, in the stage of reparations. We need some help. We've done what was asked of the state of West Virginia. These men and women have worked hard, and we've given the country what they wanted, which was some growth with cheap but dirty energy. And so we need to move forward. Paris is a good first step. Keep going in that direction. But at the same time, don't leave us just hanging out here to dry, which is where we are right now. And a lot of that, I think, is just inaction by Congress. There are plans that have been put in place with billions of dollars for research and development, Penn State, Virginia Tech, and WVU, included in the Clean Power Plan. It's just gridlocked, and we're just kidding ourselves. We think lawsuits are going to solve this problem.
Climate change is real. I understand that, but I have a little different opinion. I'm not ready to give up on coal. We have so many of our miners, particularly in Kanawha County, that are out of work. And the problem is they have to make a mortgage payment this month. They have to go to Kroger's today. And I understand there's a couple really good federal acts out there in the progress the Reclaim Act of 2016 that will hopefully divert $1 billion to West Virginia for retraining and refocusing our coal miners, particularly our older miners, into new jobs. I also understand there's the Power Plus Act out there, which is an $8 billion act, and $1 billion of that is earmarked toward West Virginia. It's primarily earmarked toward West Virginia, Kentucky, and I believe southern Pennsylvania. Those are acts that I certainly favor to help our coal mining industry transition into other forms of power, whether it be wind, solar energy, whatever. There's going to be a change in the coal industry. But having said that, we can still burn our coal cleaner. We can still mine our coal safer. We can still find new markets for our coal. Is our coal ever going to be what it was a few years ago when we were at nearly 100% production? No. I understand that we're at 48% production right now. I also understand that it is likely with whatever new administration that comes into Washington, it's going to be more favorable to coal than this administration. Perhaps we can increase our production by 25%. That would do so much for the $350 billion gap that's in our state budget, the whole. I mean, we're not collecting severance tax. We're not collecting taxes on those wages from those miners. Our tax base is being diminished, and our coal miners are going hungry. So yeah, there's fixes. There's fixes, and we need to look forward to new things. But these guys have to eat this week. And so I'm not going to give up on them today.
So do you support the Paris Climate Agreement?
I do, and of course, I think we can burn our coal better. I think that we can burn our coal. I think the buffer technology has increased significantly in the last 5 years, and I still think there's more things to do. You know, our coal is cleaner than most. It's low sulfur coal. It's cleaner than a lot of the coal that's being mined out west, or whatever they're still mining out west, if anything. But we can burn our coal better. So yeah, I do, and I agree with our DEP regulations. I think that as far as mountaintop removal, as far as surface mining, as far as deep mining, we have to adhere to regulations, and we have to go no further than what the law permits.
I believe on this issue that I agree with the Paris Agreement, and I think that it's important to understand America's role globally. America is a leader globally, and I think leading by example is the best thing that we can do in this area. But this is an area, like so many others, where there are so many competing equities. And I think that, you know, as we set the example for how we care for our planet, I think we also need to set the example for how we care for our people. And you can do that a lot. You can do that very powerfully with how you help West Virginia right now. Mr. Hunt brought up the Reclaim Act of 2016. It's a great effort. You know, Obama had the same idea in 2015, of course, because it was Obama's idea. It was a horrible idea, but you know, now it's being proposed by the Republicans, and now it's a great idea. And I think that that's sort of typical of part of the problem that we see in Congress right now with the partisanship of ideas. And I think we need to be able to set that aside and focus on people. So when we talk about care of the planet, I think that the U.S. should be leading the way, but I think that you can't do that in terms of sacrificing our people, and specifically the people here in West Virginia.
I do support that particular bill, and also the 2016 bill. But I think that our problem is we need a plan to transition from coal to other jobs, and we need an increase and an upgrade of our educational infrastructure to do that. For instance, in the coal area, we need, obviously, the technology needs to be improved to clean coal up. At the same time, research and development must be conducted on non-emitting energy. And the key is that we need training programs to transition our coal miners to other positions in high tech, which is what's coming down, because they are technological oriented, are jobs of the future. Everything in the future is going to be technology oriented. And that requires research and development, and we need to fund that out of the Congress at a very high level.
After the Sandy Hook shootings in 2013, Senator Manchin partnered with Senator Paul of Pennsylvania in an attempt to tighten back gun background checks. It narrowly failed. I'm wondering where you all would stand on that bill if it came up again. And if we could, Mr. Hunt, let's start with you, because you mentioned on your campaign website, you acknowledge your A+ rating from the NRA.
Well, you know, it's one of those situations where, as far as the short answer is yes. And as a lawyer, I've been trained to give you the short answer. But the short answer is yes. I mean, I believe all the constitutional amendments in the body of the Constitution is just as important. I think the Second Amendment is as important as the First Amendment, which is so dear to this group. I think the 10th Amendment is extremely important. I think they're all important. But I think what we miss so many times is that West Virginia has its own constitutional amendment. It has its own Second Amendment that 90% of the West Virginians in 1989 voted for. It's much, much broader than the U.S. Amendment. It doesn't have the part about the well-organized militia in it. It simply says that if you're a West Virginian, you have the right to own and bear arms. And when you look at that amendment, Vermont, one of the most liberal states in the Union, in 1926, their Supreme Court held that their amendment, their constitutional amendment, was so broad that the citizens of Vermont had the ability to carry guns concealed without checks, period. And that's happened in Vermont since 1926. So while I do agree that we need to regulate the guns, and I would not have voted for open carry here, and not for the reason that you think, as a 14-year member of the legislature, not for the reason that you think I wouldn't. I wouldn't have voted for open carry, or what they call constitutional carry, but it's really permitless carry, because permitless carry infringes on your Fourth Amendment right. And to me, the Fourth Amendment is just as important as the first. It's just as important as the second or the 10th. Because when you have permitless carry, what happens is, anytime that you're stopped for a basic, because you have the tail light out, because it's a basic traffic stop, that police officer is going to have to assume that you're armed and that you're concealed. And that police officer is going to have to do a pat down. And when he or she does that pat down, they're going to find things that they normally wouldn't have found. So that person's constitutional Fourth Amendment rights, because of constitutional carry, are gone in West Virginia. So that's my problem with constitutional carry, and that's my problem with the new legislature. I mean, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know, everything we do in the legislature, as a legislature can tell, there's a yin and a yang. We push one way, and it pushes back 3 ways. So I hope I answered your question, but the short answer is yes.
Anybody else?
Real quick, I'm sorry. Yes, you would have voted for the Manchin-Toomey bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if that was the question, yes, I would have voted for the Manchin-Toomey bill. When we're talking about constitutional carry or concealed carry, that's a matter of state law. I mean, Heller says what it says, that, you know, you've got a right to, bad cases make bad law. You know, in D.C., you couldn't have done it all, at privacy of your own home, and the Scalia Road, no rights absolute. I bought a pistol last year, just because it was 101. And before I left the store, they did a background check. I mean, we're smart enough to write laws, and we have, that don't allow the compilation of that information. It's not like a national database that will identify gun owners and make them so get snatched away. Because somebody else has a paranoid fear of the unknown, which has never happened in the past and won't happen in the future, it doesn't mean we shouldn't have at least a basic background check. Now, how you implement that is a different story. You know, you've got people who get on a list about gun purchases. There ought to be somewhere down the line that person can somehow rehabilitate themselves in their lifetime to reinstate their right to have a pistol. I'm not talking about violent felons. You know, people have had some mental health issues. maybe a misdemeanor domestic violence issue, with a person who's now their spouse and they've gone through years of exemplary conduct. That certainly needs to be taken, but I've yet to see, and I ask everybody who expresses to me they're going to take your guns idea, well, tell me the last time that you heard about a law-abiding citizen who lawfully bought a pistol or a rifle and has it in their possession and had that taken away by some government authority. I've yet to have anybody point out a case like that. And we had, with the background checks we had, we're just talking about gun shows and some other limited purposes. I don't see how it could be a big deal.
Anyone else on Manchin too?
I thought it was brave of Senator Manchin to do that because everybody knows that the NRA is a particularly strong lobby. So I was particularly impressed by that. I think that one thing that happens is the NRA gets a dual role. They represent the gun manufacturers and the gun owners. And I live in rural West Virginia, Monroe County. I'm not a particularly good hunter, so our neighbors are kind enough to give me some deer to put in the freezer. But I think it's a good tradition that fathers teach their sons about hunting and stuff like that. To me, is a really positive solution. But the idea that people need semi-automatic weapons is, to me, totally unjustifiable.
So yes, on Manchin.
Yeah, oh, definitely, but maybe even go further than that. Yeah.
I definitely, yes. I would actually go farther. I grew up in West Virginia hunting as a kid. My grandfather and father taught me how to hunt. I later became quite adept at automatic weapons and as an infantry officer. Before that, I was an enlisted infantry soldier. And there's absolutely no reason that you need, other than a bolt action rifle, to hunt bear in the state of West Virginia. As I understand, that is the largest of the seasoned for animals in the state. As far as concealed carry goes, as a former military police company commander, I can tell you that you're now putting police officers potentially in danger that they don't have now. And that is when they approach a car, which is the second most dangerous thing that a police officer does. Domestic violence or a domestic call is the first. You have to assume that the people in the car, or at least one person, is carrying a weapon. And that's a total different story. It's a much higher pressure on that police officer. So for that reason alone, I would disagree with concealed carry. Permitless, fine with permits, but not with.
Okay, and I'd just like to clarify for anyone listening or watching online that the Manchin 2 bill doesn't have anything to do with permitless carry or concealed carry. So,
Okay. Regarding the bill, yes, I would have voted in favor of it. But I think that one, it does kind of highlight it. I mean, it's a sensitive subject, one, because I think the strength of the gun lobbyists, particularly the NRA, and I'm new to this political world and kind of the way that those ratings work. They send you these little questionnaires. You agree A with the NRA, or B, or you a communist, hate guns, and it's like, well, am I a rapist or a murderer? Which one is it? I mean, it's those things aren't fair. But I think when you look at the American people. And I think, Senator Manchin has been pretty good about this, about using a little bit of common sense when it comes to legislating. And you look at gun sense, and I mean, I own a lot of firearms, and if I'm going to exchange firearms or trade or sell, I certainly want to know that, the person I'm selling to doesn't have mental instabilities or, a criminal background. And I think that's just a responsible thing to do as a gun owner. I think the majority of Americans overwhelmingly support background checks. And I think in this context too, it's important, the Second Amendment is really the only constitutional right with a commercial industry behind it. That's why it's a delicate subject, but no constitutional right is without some limitations. And I think we just need to be judicial in how we apply those limitations.
Used to call, maybe some still do, I guess, the news media as the fourth estate. There's three branches of government: executive, or represented in judicial. But now there's a concern among some that the fourth most powerful branch is the regulatory state. Federal government, has a really, really large regulatory bureaucracy, or a bunch of large regulatory bureaucracies, and some people feel that are out of control and going beyond what Congress had intended in passing laws. So just like to get your take on that. Is that true, or do we have too much regulation of too much regulatory bodies? And if so, how should Congress address it? You're nodding on it.
Well, yeah, I have a little experience in that regard. I was recommended to the president to be the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and Director of the Patent and Trademark Office, and I was not selected. But in preparation for that possibility, I became a patent examiner. And the reason I did that was to understand, they taught this at West Point, you ought to know what your people are doing, where the work is actually done. Because there's a level of bureaucracy between you and them, and if you've not done that, you can be, let's say, led down the wrong path. And I did learn that the bureaucracy in particular there, and I imagine it's the same way throughout the government, that there are so many people between where the work is done and where the decisions are made that well, example, General Electric, we would take maybe 3 meetings to come up with a decision. At the Patent and Trademark Office, it took months. So the bureaucracy is out of control. And I do not see how that's going to change in the near future unless we address it by the Congress and the oversight becomes more critical.
Sure, I on this topic, I definitely, well, first I thought the fourth branch of government was the media guys, one, right? Yeah, it used to be anyway. But I mean, I think the federal regulatory, state is one of the reasons why I wanted to run for Congress. There are really 2 fundamental roles that Congress has. One is the budget. The other is lawmaking, rulemaking. And when you look at, we talk about infrastructure so much and the need to invest in infrastructure. While our legal infrastructure is right now strangling, I think, the entrepreneurship of America. And that falls squarely in the responsibility of Congress at the federal level. We do need to simplify things and make it easier for small business. It's too challenging right now. And I can say, having spent, the past 12 years working with, a very regulated industry and a lot of government contracts and things like that, it shouldn't take a team of lawyers to work with or to help a small business. It should be simple. We should encourage entrepreneurship of America. And I think that one way of doing that is simplifying our regulatory structure.
I agree. The regulatory structure, particularly with the EPA, is overreaching. Regulations, in my opinion, can become dangerous because in most cases, those regulations are not approved by Congress. If they are approved, they're approved in a bundle. And in that bundle, no one is able to really know what's in the bundle or what the regulation does. So it doesn't have the approval of the people that were elected by the Americans. I think the Founding Fathers in the separation of power scheme determined, and I read the Federalist Papers and I have degrees and all that, but determined that the strongest branch of government should be the legislature because they are directly responsible to the people. The weakest branch of government should be the court system. And somewhere in there is the chief executive, but with the regulatory power, it certainly gives the chief executive the power which of course is the President of the United States, because that individual appoints the director of the EPA, the director of whatever agency, who then makes the regulations. So basically, we've changed the power scheme in this country from what the Founding Fathers intended, that the people make the decisions. So right now, we have the executive branch of government through regulation making the power. And that's extremely dangerous. And, you know, we look at our own EPA. I don't think there's been a new mining permit issued since Obama's been president. And obviously that is not only an EPA decision, but that's certainly a decision coming out of the White House. And that certainly has to be overreaching.
You know, I would say something about one of the comments that the Second Amendment is the only one that's backed by commercial enterprise. I think you folks make money selling newspapers, right? Back to the First Amendment. But, you know, you got to be careful. And people tell me all the time, when you hear politicians say that we've got to free our entrepreneurs, we've got to free industry from regulation, and my answer is, well, all right, tell me which one. Tell me which one. Tell me which regulation you say is choking or throttling a particular business, and then let's deal with it. Obviously, this is a big, complex country, and you've got administrative agencies, you've got agencies in the executive branch that have to operate under rules and some regulations. Whether there are too many in a given instance, well, someone should be able to figure that out. And you can't just blame the executive branch. Congress writes the law. If there is a regulation issued by an administrative agency and enforced by the President of the United States through his designees, the Congress of the United States has the perfect right within its constitutional restraints to just change the law, correct? So it's a default by everybody. I don't think we lay it all at the feet of the executive branch. My question always is, however, okay, which one? It's easy to say that there are too many regulations. And I was down there's a little business in Nitro. They sell shade and awnings. Nice people, same families owned it for like 50 years. My wife and I went in there, and on the wall, they got probably 12 placards: unemployment, workers' comp, conditions of work, Fair Labor Standards Act. It's a whole wall. You know, we just looked at that. There's got to be a better way to do that. And I'm sure there is if somebody thought about it. But just generally saying we're overregulated, I don't think that's going to solve it. Let's start. Somebody has to start. And how are you going to get it through Congress, right? Anybody watched 60 Minutes last night? When you've got a Congress where you're expected to spend 4 hours a day making phone calls to raise money for a national party, how are you going to get that changed through Congress? So, I mean, we have to deal with reality. Find me one that you say is damaging. Let me go to Washington, I'll try and change it for somebody who's a member, lives in this district for the good of the country. But I can't just say overwhelmingly that there's a problem with each and every regulation, because I don't think there is.
My feeling is that the regulations play a really good thing about creating a business environment that's healthy. And I think that there's been an assumption by businesses that that the less regulation, the more profitable their business will be. But I personally don't think that's true. And just the one example we all experienced here was when the poison went into the Kanawha River and 300,000 people were without water. And I think if there had been more regulation, that problem would have solved. Or a big branch, if there had been more regulations and more enforcement, we would have solved that problem. So personally, I think what's happened is the whole political discussion has shifted to the right, and the right says the regulations are bad because some people believe that they can maximize profit by minimizing regulation. And I think that's a false premise.
Real quick, I will just say on the, to 2 points that Mr. Payton raised. One, that I got when I said in context of the Second Amendment with an industry behind it, but I mean, speech is regulated. You know, the Fourth Amendment with privacy, it is regulated. When you come to the Second Amendment, that's the only amendment that you get to that they're like, no regulation for it. It's an unabashed right to carry and firearms, and the government has no voice in it. That was my point on that. And the second one is in context of federal regulations. While I didn't get specific, I certainly can. But as far as a legislature, what my philosophy would be, I mean, the founding document with 27 amendments of this great nation is 16 and a half pages long. The Affordable Care Act, which I think did a tremendous amount of good for an extraordinary amount of people, is 2,700 pages. We can simplify our regulation. That's one example, but there are numerous.
Well, I think it's only an unrestricted right in the minds of certain people. I mean, that's the issue. I mean, obviously, Justice Scalia didn't think holding a gun was an unrestricted right. And obviously, your interest in free speech is not necessarily unrestricted. There's one called Sullivan v. New York Times, right, where it was a long way to enforce it.
What do you all think is the biggest foreign policy threat or issue facing the country, and how should Congress act to address that problem? Start with
The largest,
what do you think, if you could identify one, what would it be?
it would be China. China is our largest threat. We have educated 50,000 Chinese engineers in the best engineering schools in the world today. My West Point, and I'm not alone in this, my West Point classmate, the Undersecretary of Defense for Procurement, Technology, and Logistics, goes around the circuit and makes speeches about how the technological gap between us and the Chinese is rapidly closing. We've got to do something about that. We're outnumbered 1.5 billion to 300 million, and we need to utilize every one of our 330 million people as effectively as we can. That includes educating them, getting them off drugs, and having them be productive in their lives and gain some self-esteem that will make America better, the United States in particular. I think this is clearly the largest problem that we're going to face in the long term.
Yeah, I think a lot about foreign policy. I'm a Quaker and I'm a pacifist, and I think that personally the expansion of militarism is our biggest foreign policy problem. And I think that the war in Iraq was sort of a classic example, because we were out there protesting before it started, and if people had listened, we would have saved ourselves. I think personally the war in Iraq created ISIS, and I think that the continued reliance on militarism is sort of like, if the only thing you have is a hammer, all the problems look like nails. So we keep seeing all the problems to be solved in terms of military solutions. And I personally think that's a big mistake, because when you use military solutions, you oftentimes create as many enemies as you create allies. So I think that that's a big problem. I think that this is an issue that's interesting because it spans the spectrum. Ron Paul, who's a libertarian, which is fairly far from my beliefs, is against the United States taking on the role of policeman of the world. He doesn't like the fact that there's huge numbers of U.S. bases surrounding the world. And Eisenhower, like I said, recommended that people be wary of the military industrial complex. And he wanted to put Congress too, because Congress is part of that whole thing. But anyway, I think that that's the biggest problem, and I think that we can solve it, but it has to take smart thinking, because many of the candidates say we're going to be tougher, and I think tougher hasn't worked for us in terms of finding good foreign policy solutions.
We have a $7 trillion debt, and I think the biggest part of that is because we're fighting wars in at least two countries. Well, I think the United States should be a leader, and well, I don't think that we should build walls. I think the United States needs to defend the United States. It needs to defend its citizens against ISIS and all other threats. But I know today the president has sent 250 more advisors to Syria. That creates a situation that reminds me of Vietnam. It's how it started. We sent advisors, and then before you know, we were in a full-scale war. I don't know if we can afford a third war right now. And I think that we need, frankly, to bring the wars that we're fighting to some conclusion and bring our troops home. And I believe that that is a big foreign policy crisis in the United States. We're draining the domestic economy by fighting wars in at least two countries.
Did you say foreign policy or national security?
Foreign policy.
Well, from the standpoint of raw foreign policy, I would have to find myself long-term in agreement with Tom. Obviously, the rise of China and its surrogates in East Asia is a significant problem. And you can see their incursions into the South China Sea and the islands in that area. Their rapidly growing influence in the Pacific Basin, that is a problem from a foreign policy standpoint. Now, it's separate and apart from national security, homeland security issues that are posed by radical Islam. To me, those are sort of, they're an offshoot, they're a spawn of failed foreign policy. Incursions into the Middle East in areas where we have no business, but when Colin Powell's predictions come on the roost, if you break it, you fix it, you own it. And we're going to have to find a way to own it. At the same time, this country is not going to deteriorate because of the efforts of radical Islamists in the Middle East or the Philippines or East Asia or in Berkeley, California. It's going to deteriorate if we let that dictate what's essentially a new normal in the American way of life and allow this country to rot from the inside out because we're so concerned about the unavoidable consequences of international terrorism that we neglect things at home. That's my belief. I mean, a new normal is a new normal. Whoever thought you would take your shoes off at an airport? I mean, we're Americans and we line up now relative docility to submit to things that my parents would have considered completely unacceptable. You have to watch that.
Well, I think when it comes to foreign policy and national security, it's really hard to separate out the two. I think our foreign policy is directly tied into our national security. I believe generally in a whole of government approach. If you look at the 3Ds, I've had the good fortune of being able to work in two different embassies overseas. One in Pakistan and Islamabad, the other one in Manila in the Philippines. And within each embassy, you've got a defense element, sure, the military piece, but you also have USAID, which is a development piece. Then you have state for diplomacy. And I think when you look at dealing with foreign issues, you really got to look at and use a whole of government approach to confronting things. I think it is unfortunate that we use too quickly. I believe in the past have used war or a defense alternative because a lot of those plans are shelved. They're easy. And I think it brings up a problem. Too many people, I think, are disconnected to the military. I mean, we have less than 1% of our folks serving in the military right now. And I think when you look at that, and the fewest number of veterans as members of our Congress, and when you look at that, I think a big part of that, there's a quote by Robert E. Lee that said, "Thank God that war is so great, or else we'd learn to love it too much." And I think that that's part of what we've seen is people have too quickly pulled those defense plans off the shelf and enacted them rather than using, maybe the diplomacy first approach or maybe an aid approach. But I agree with my colleagues and the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that said the greatest threat to our national security is our national debt. And I think that that's something that we need to get under control as well. And that's something that certainly relates to China as the primary debt holder of so much of America's debt. So.
The U.S. has had a national debt continually since I think 1835. What evidence do you see? What markets showing that it's a big issue? Why is that a big threat? I mean, shouldn't we have seen something in the last 180 years?
Well, if it's a response to me,
I'd be happy to have everyone answer, but that's what made me think of it.
I mean, you have a computer in front of you, and I assume you did the math on that or the background, at least the Google search. But I don't know that we've always had a national debt. I mean, under Clinton, we have a national debt.
Well,
we had a debt, but we had a surplus. Yeah. So each year right now, we're increasing our debt. So we're $19 trillion in debt, or $70,000 for every living American. And then you look at the amount of people that are working to pay that debt down. It's one that I'm not sure we're going to be able to get out from underneath. And it's something that I do think we have to get under control because it impacts global. I mean, we're the interconnectedness of our economies now, and it's one that I think the world has gotten smaller than in times past, and I think because of that we have a responsibility and it's an important time to be able to start getting it under control.
The economics of national debt, the economics of deficit spending are actually positive for the United States within limits. I don't think before the New Deal that the United States was able to spend more money than it held in Fort Knox, whether it be in silver or gold. And that's the reason we dropped the silver and gold standard. So we dropped the silver and gold standard and went to the fair faith and credit standard where we could produce more money than we held in silver and gold. Roosevelt used deficit spending for the first time to bring this country out of the Great Depression. And vice versa, I think that if we go to a balanced budget into the United States immediately, it's going to cause a Great Depression, and probably a depression worse than we had in 1929. So, having some debt and having some deficit spending certainly is not a bad thing. And I think once again, that's what Roosevelt used to bring this country out of depression in 1929 through his administration. So it scares me when people say, well, immediately we should balance the federal budget. I don't think it's possible, and I also think it's detrimental. But a $7 trillion debt, I don't even know how many zeros that is. That's a lot of zeros. We have to do something about that.
Let me answer, if I can answer the question, it's what evidence do I see today that the national debt? Well, I don't really see much, to tell you the truth. It seems to me the fear from more conservative economists is that the national debt will suck out all the available capital. We're going to have illiquid federal government debts, more secure. People look to it, and you're going to see a paucity of private capital. You're going to see interest rates start to rise, and then eventually you're going to see some inflation. Well, I haven't seen any of that, despite the fact it's been predicted for the last several years. It just hasn't happened. The debt, actually, the deficit's shrinking. I mean, debt and deficit are two different things. Deficit's what you spend a year versus what you bring in. $1 trillion, as I understand, over the last year under president. That's always been with us. It's not what your debt is, it's what you buy with it. If you buy yourself a house, you're going to have some debt. Unfortunately, bombs, you can buy bridges in Iraq and Afghanistan, you don't get much for it. So unless you invest goods that do serve the purpose you're in, people, you always run the risk of being like the last days of the Soviet Union. You get yourself piled up with debt, you can't be. That's certainly a dangerous situation there. Yeah, I actually think we could probably do some good in this country if we refinance some of the debt we have at what are now interest rates, and free to own the house or pave the driveway. Figuratively, roads being built, some bridges, educate these children, put them on productive use. To say that it's $70,000, $7 million a person, once you get to it. If you're just looking for a number, if you don't like the debt, just shut down. You can shut down the Department of Education. It's a number. But let's just get to a number. I think there's a lot more to it. Mostly.
I think of a couple aspects. One is everybody knows that in the coal towns in West Virginia, the people that. So personally, I think that it would be good to get out from underneath it because the Chinese control a lot of our debt, and that would make it good to do. And sharecroppers were an example. If people are so sharecropper was in debt to the person who owned the land, it was a problem. And I think the biggest part of the deficit started in tax cuts for the upper 1%, increasing first in the debt. I love the social programs, but I think the tax breaks for the 1% and the military budget is so inflated. I think we spend more than the next 10 countries on our, which I think is a mistake.
Agree with that portion because we are really facing difficulty, particularly with China. I think the defense is absolutely necessary, and I would raise the military budget. One of the things that we've been talking about, and this is a question I have of everyone, and that is workforce utilization in West Virginia. I would argue that it's close to what it was in the Great Depression, and we need to take some action to get that under control. I mean, does anybody know? The last time I saw it was 53% was the utilization.
Which is fairly consistent with what it's been over the past couple of decades at least.
Oh, really? 53?
Yeah.
The whole country? Well, what is it for the country?
It hovers around about 65%, 70%. I mean, you've got the elderly, you've got the disabled. And one of the big problems with workforce participation, at least in this state, and everybody who's been convicted of any degree of felony at any time in their life disqualified from the workforce, and no national or state legislature so far seems to have the guts to deal with that issue. I'm sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's all right. Speaking of felons, I think Terry McAuliffe just dealt with it a little bit over in Virginia. And he made them citizens again, gave them the right to vote and to hold public office and so forth.
So they can vote here once they, in West Virginia it's different. As felons here, quote, under conviction, which means while you're either incarcerated or on probation or parole, you can't vote. But once you finish, you can. But we tried, I mean, we here in this state, if you're over the age of 26 years, you can't expunge any conviction. That's just not right. Our legislature has no disposition to deal with that, and that's one thing that holds back probably 12 or 15,000 potential workers, and they just give up hope. I can tell you, I've seen them for years and years, people who want to sell a little insurance or get a job at a Go Mart. Once they check the box, they're just finished.
One thing I like is that I helped start a worker-owned business in Rome County, and I worked there for 5 years, but it lasted for 32 years. Because rather than recruit an industry from outside, which Rome County has done, we had a veneer plant. As soon as the tax breaks were over, they were out of there. So if you have locally created businesses, I think that's good. The other thing is I think we need to validate the informal economy. I mean, my wife and I built our own house. We grow our own food. We make our own electricity, surplus of electricity. And I think that kind of grassroots solution should go along with the government programs. It shouldn't be either or. Like in terms of healthcare, that would help healthcare. So I give a pitch for, you know, for putting the two together. Both the informal, yeah.
Did you finish your answer on the debt?
On the debt. No, I didn't. The debt, I'm not so sure that it is the problem that we all think it is. We keep talking about China controlling us. China is not controlling us. If they were, our interest rates would be much higher. And that would then put a lot of pressure on us, but they're not. I mean, 0% is essentially what we're at right now. So I think you have to spend money to make money. At least that's what they tell us in business. And to do that, you've got to invest in your workforce, then in your infrastructure and in your educational system, and then you'll be able to bring in business to West Virginia. Right now, with a 47% unemployed, really, it's a 47% unemployment rate. That's not helping us. I've driven all over West Virginia, and I have trouble with Wi-Fi, with broadband. That is, as a business person coming in here, I would look at that. You know, we could have Silicon Valley East in the mountains right here, but not without broadband. You're not going to get anybody to do it, not without the infrastructure. So we're going to have to invest in that before we can get people to come. And until we do that, we're going to have a 47%. Now, the problem with that is, what do those people do? They don't do anything. And that gives them, lowers their self-esteem, makes them ripe for drug addiction. And I've seen it when I was in the Army in Europe. You've got to keep people busy. Give them a job, put them to work, things will get better. And even on the drug scene.
If this is possible to answer somewhat quickly. You all mentioned the incumbent, I think, when you made your introductions. And again, somewhat quickly, is it specific things or just a way of being, or what do you?
I can give you a couple of specifics. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I read the Metro News website in the morning, and they had a story on there, and it was captioned West Virginia delegation comments on Norfolk Southern. And they escaped a buyout by Canadian National. So I scanned down the story, and it was the delegation only consisted of Senators Manchin, Capito, and Representatives Jenkins and McKinley. Okay, well, that might not seem like much, except in order to avoid the buyout by Canadian National, Norfolk Southern did something that really affects this district and my part of the district. The railroad line that runs from the Dickinson Yards to the Buckeye Yards in Columbus is closed. Closed. No trains are running west of the Ohio River now. They haven't since last month. It was a cost-cutting measure. And there's a petition that's going to be filed with the Federal Railway Administration to abandon that line in Southeast Ohio. Now, it's a big deal in Southeast Ohio. It doesn't seem to be a big deal here. And I would think that a congressman who had his pulse on what's going on in the district would know that one of your major east-west rail lines is going to close. And so all we've got now is an interface with CSX that's going to radically increase freight rates. I don't think that's what a congressman should be doing. And there was a conference over in Washington, D.C. in February. I've got the fellow that consults with me about agriculture. And this topic was restoring trade with Cuba and agricultural products to the pre-2008 levels, because they were shipping millions of pounds of apples and peaches to Cuba from the Eastern Panhandle, and turkeys and chickens from Pendleton and Hardy County. Now, every major trade association that was dealing with agriculture was there. It was at the National Press Club, and there were congressmen there from Pennsylvania, Virginia, Arkansas, Michigan for the cherries. Every group that was involved in that trade except Mr. Mooney. Now, he doesn't want that. He doesn't want trade with Cuba because his mother's a Cuban or an immigrant. And I can understand his hard feelings. But somewhere along the line, you have to put the feelings of your district ahead of that. So those are two specific examples I have. I have some others, but you said be sure.
I think I can be quick. Alex Mooney is an absent congressman. Mr. Mooney told us that he would come to West Virginia and be one of us and live among us and understand West Virginia and represent West Virginia. He hasn't. He doesn't live in West Virginia. He doesn't even have a car registered in West Virginia. Alex Mooney, his office is in my building, 405 Capitol Street. I've never seen him. Never seen the gentleman. It's interesting that when President Obama came to Charleston to help us with our war with heroin, Mr. Mooney said he was too busy to come to Charleston because he didn't want to miss any votes. However, he was able to go to Iowa and campaign for Ted Cruz, and he missed a lot of votes. Mr. Mooney is not a West Virginian. He's not one of us. He doesn't understand West Virginia, and I don't think he cares. He's an absent congressman.
Well, actually, it's a little worse than that. I think he's just incompetent, period.
That's how you really feel,
So you think he's incompetent?
Yes. As a representative of this state, he's incompetent.
Yeah, I think obviously that we concur with the colleagues. Is he's absent. And I think he's an ideologue. He's tied to the far right wing of the House with the Freedom Caucus. He's essentially alienated himself from the House, and I mean the Freedom Caucus has hijacked the House. And when you look at it, we have 5 electoral votes here from West Virginia, Maybe in 2020, we'll have 4. And the only way that you gain influence for our state is, by being able to work with other people. He's certainly not doing that. He's alienating himself from other people. And so in addition to just being absent from everything from, when we had the incident at the airport, the example was brought up here, in addition to being absent, I think he's also just not helping in what he's doing there. He's used West Virginia to promote his own personal ideologies, and that's wrong.
I'd pick up on what the airport business is a disgrace. His picture, he's not been up there. Now listen, if that airport doesn't get fixed, we don't get some money, and it's not a whole lot of money. Senator Manchin put in for some, and the BRAC commission meets without Robert Byrd in existence. If that airport, that air base goes, you're going to see tremendously increased airfare because you're going to have to raise landing fees to cover fire protection and security. Now, if it's been up to me, we'd built a new airport west of here in the 60s, but it wasn't up to me. I was in high school. But we've got what we've got, and you can't cut off your nose to spite your face. We'll end up being a morning, midnight airport. Catch a few flights out in the morning, a few flights back in the evening for hubs, because nobody's going to fly in here with the landing fees that you're going to have to impose if the air base leaves. And if nothing else, John Slack, who's a congressman from this district for years, was instrumental in maintaining that airport where it is. If nothing else, that would be enough to have Mr. Mooney removed from office, I think, by the electorate.
Did you want to say something about violence?
They took the words out of my mouth.
I'll let you take that back.
In the Democratic presidential campaign, one of the big issues has been income equality and the growing gap between the wealthiest people in the country and many of the working class. And I'm wondering what, if anything, you all do in Congress to help prevent that, or maybe we shouldn't, to market take care of it. What's the way?
Well, the first thing I would do is the Social Security tax is a regressive tax. And I believe that we should have everyone pay above the 119,000 limit. Just keep on, no matter what their income is, just keep paying into Social Security. The other thing I would do is I would raise taxes on the upper 1% of the upper 1%. And that would certainly help with our income tax, our deficit. And I think the guy who lives out in Omaha, Nebraska, what's his name? Buffett. Yeah, the Oracle of Omaha, right? Doesn't he say that he sort of supports that? And the guy's the second or third wealthiest man in the world. So if he can afford it and wants it, why can't we do it?
I think the problem is tax structure. And I think that the middle class, well, I know the middle class pays most of the taxes in this country. Maybe we should look at something like flat tax, where everyone pays a flat fee, including corporations. I've seen some numbers that if we would introduce a flat tax in the United States, only at maybe 10%, which is a lot less than I pay. At 10%, then we could pay off the national debt in a couple of years.
I'd like to say about that. Because what Tom said, first of all, I agree with the idea that we should take the cap off Social Security, FICA, because it's a regressive tax, but it's a progressive payout. That's the difference. I mean, a flat tax and a sales tax are regressive taxes that bear down on the people who spend all of their income. There's no progressivity on the other side. I mean, the maximum benefit I'll ever draw from Social Security is far lower in proportion to my contribution than for a person who draws the minimum benefit. So it's got a progressive payout at the end. Shouldn't be a problem with raising that to make the system solvent. And in my estimation, to move towards expanding Medicare gradually and incrementally downward so that we could somewhere along the line get into some sort of a single payer system, or at least an alternate system, public option. You got to raise some revenue. You're talking about Kennedy's tax cuts. That's always justified. Well, revenues actually went down, I think, through the 60s. After the proposal to John Kennedy was, well, we're going to do some deficit spending. He said, well, he didn't like that idea, let's cut taxes. Well, it's the same thing. But remember, he's cutting tax from a top rate of 90% down to a 70% on the earned income rate. Reagan reduced his tax reduction was down to 50%. You know, a Democrat president, a Democrat Congress put a 10% surcharge on everybody's income tax the last 3 years of the Johnson administration to pay for the Vietnam War, and that's why we raised more money, and we had a balanced budget. You know, you have to look at alternates. There's a lot of trading on Wall Street. There are a lot of incremental sales there that could be taxed at some sales tax level, some low level, and the people from New York won't like it. But you ought to incentivize work and disincentivize speculation. So you raise some money and you cut down on speculation. If you do that, I mean, it's going to come to the point, you know, when you think about what happened with acid rain, you know, the idea of capping and trading or trading some carbon credits back and forth raised a lot of money. But again, it's what you spend it for. You pay down some of the debt, but if you don't, and I certainly agree with my other candidates, if children can't go to school well nourished and have some kindergarten, have teachers who are secure in their jobs, in buildings that are safe, and with vocational and technical training available to them to fit into the modern workforce, then we can raise taxes and cut taxes all we want. The country's not going to get moved.
The thing I'm thinking about this is I think I agree with all the other taxes, but I think nobody mentioned the excise or the inheritance tax. And that's a real big one in terms of level. I think a role of government is to keep the gap between the very rich and the rest of us lessen. Because a society that has a big gap between rich and poor is not very democratic. It's actually not a very healthy economy, because what really stimulates the economy is that middle class that spends money. And without that, it's sort of like Henry Ford believed in paying his workers so they could buy a Ford. And we've got a situation now where we're exporting our jobs and manufacturing and so forth. And I think in terms of rural West Virginia, in terms of lowering that gap between the rich and the poor, I think we can have a lot of community efforts. I was involved with the Benetton Foundation on a project where we helped neighborhoods fund little tiny mini grants just for neighborhood improvement. But it really struck me how powerful that was to see the whole age range, school kids all the way up to seniors, sitting down and talking about how do we build a stronger community. Because I think the reason we need democracy is because we have some huge problems. The climate's just one of them, but we have a problem with an economic system that misprioritizes things because people and planet are put behind profit in terms of prioritization, and it causes a lot of problems. So I think that's a really huge problem, income inequality, and I think that for me it was a huge relief to see the Democratic debates where people were talking seriously about that.
You know, I got to disagree. I'm sorry.
No, I think, I mean, obviously income inequality is a huge issue right now across America, and I think it's one that is extraordinarily relevant to West Virginia. I mean, we are predominantly a working class state, and that gap between the rich and the poor is a legitimate one. I think when you look at, you know, the difference between maybe a presidential plan and executive, you know, this is what I will do, and you look at a legislative body, this is what I will support. You know, in a legislative body, you got to work with others, and I think generally, you know, you may have revenue neutral plans that tend to be the ones that are easiest to pass. And when in those revenue neutral plans, I do think we need to start reallocating money from the very wealthy and reallocating it back down to the working class. We've got to take initiatives, be creative in being able to do that.
And I just don't agree that the function of government is to reallocate or reapportion income through taxation for the sole purpose of income equality. I think appropriately, a well-organized and well-conducted government would reallocate. I mean, democracy is redistributive in and of itself. A number of people impute their power in individuals or institutions, and then repeat that back in a way that's collectively for the whole good. So, I mean, I just don't agree with taxation purely for the purpose of, otherwise it's just taking from you and giving to me, as opposed to taking you and implementing programs or opportunities that would give everybody the opportunity and real tools to achieve income equality, right? Because it's a fact. A child born to, say a lady that works at the Go-Mart stocking shelves in Nitro, her 3-year-old child, she's a single mother, doesn't have any opportunity. You can live in La La Land and say, look at Barack Obama. Well, there's 1 in a billion. There's no real opportunity in this country right now to accept a child of somebody who's a hedge funder in Greenwich, Connecticut. Now, so it has to be more to it than just take his money and give it to the child. You could prioritize your society and implement programs that would benefit the entirety of our country. And that would be my position. But I just don't think the American people ever buy it, because everybody thinks they're going to be rich, right? Everybody, no matter how poor, you believe you're going to be rich, and you think that this income inequality distribution is going to hurt you. So you're never going to make any progress to get away from that.
I just wanted a short rebuttal, which is that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we had a much higher tax rate and we had a very prosperous economy.
Well, we went to the moon and built the interstate.
Yeah, so I'm saying that a much higher tax rate
And fought the Vietnam War.
did some good. That's all I'm saying.
Anything else?
I got one really quick one, just a 2-word answer. Who do you think the next president should be?
Bernie Sanders.
Hillary.
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton.
Given the choices, Hillary Clinton.
Paul Farrell.
Paul Farrell.
All right, anything else? Okay, thank you all very
Thank
much
you.
for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.